Well, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I'm suffering from an English cold, which I hope Greece will improve while I'm here. It also may have had an impact on my mood, because normally when broaching topics like this, I'm the optimist in the panel. I'm always looking for new ways round. Yes, all right. Well, you've had a certain take of optimism. I'm afraid my pessimism on this occasion looks at the prospect for a new and significantly different security architecture, and rapidly comes to the conclusion that all the incentives at the moment are going in the opposite direction. What we're seeing is exactly what Uzi has described already, which is the small advances made by the unilateralists, that countries are pursuing their national interest step by step. If we look at what Russia is doing in Syria, what Turkey is now focusing on doing in Syria, these are the people who are making progress on their own terms and in their own interests in the Middle East, because they have strategies and tactics and the means and resources to fulfill them. So they may not be grand aims, they may have an end goal. I mean, we keep hearing that the Iranians' goal in Syria is to build permanent bases. And in fact, Israeli satellite intelligence has just described a large base being built 13 kilometers outside Damascus, which will have the missile capability of hitting anywhere in Israel. In fact, it may already do so. This is being very heavily monitored, but it's a massive cause of concern. Israel, as we've seen, with relative impunity, has been able to advance on what outside powers, particularly the European Union, and in the past the US, has seen as very unconstructive settlement and other buildings going on in what, under international law, the rest of the world does not see as being part of Israel. And yet, time after time, we see this continuing. This is not a constructive way towards eventually reaching a two-state solution. However, can we actually reverse some of this? One of my concerns is not just where the US is on this. They have become very, as the French would say, partie prise by their declarations over Jerusalem. And in fact, this year may be a crunch time in the region when the US Embassy is actually formally set up in Jerusalem, admittedly just on the border of West Jerusalem, but in ways that, if you look at the recent polling of Palestinians, 96% of them will not agree to any kind of two-state solution that does not have Jerusalem as the capital of a putative future Palestinian state. So we can see this is once again going to be an explosive issue. On the other hand, we have the European Union, which laudably has supported a two-state solution for Israel-Palestine all these years, but has never really committed the resources and devised a strategy for actually getting to that endpoint. It has always been, the European position has always been dependent on what the US is doing in terms of negotiations. And I agree with Nabil over when all this started. I think the current dynamic, the historian in me says, did in fact start in 2003. Not just the invasion of Iraq and what happened to Iraq afterwards, as we've seen, and the rise of Daesh, ISIS, and other terrorist and jihadist movements, but also what it did for the image of the US and the West in general, the US and Europe, as outsiders who could somehow determine and organize and engineer the outcome. The reputation of the US was lost in the process of that occupation of Iraq because it failed. And however the spin was put on how the US and in turn the British forces who were there in southern Iraq actually left Iraq, it was not seen as a success. It was seen as a way that the outside international community, as it liked to call itself, the major powers in the UN Security Council, and some of them were against the invasion of Iraq, including France, how they'd not been able to engineer a more positive outcome, where in the past, up until 2003, actors within the region, and indeed actors from outside the region like Russia, hesitated before they made moves because they feared a backlash or some kind of punishment from the US, whether through airstrikes, etc. Now we know the history of Syria has followed in the same track, that red lines that were drawn under President Obama's presidency were not respected. And therefore, the actors who are incrementally in their national interests gaining a foothold, whether it's Iran, whether it's Russia, whether it's Turkey, and indeed others in the region, are doing so incrementally in ways that they calculate can advance their interests bit by bit without having to pay a price. And at the moment, the price is not there. No one is really paying it. So what do I see moving forward? Well, I did consider energy as a unifying force. Well, just the last week, where we've seen all sorts of upsets in, for example, the Turkish interception of a Cypriot exploration ship in the new gas fields that Cyprus is laying claim to, will, I think, endanger the kind of cooperation that has already been put in place with Greece, Cyprus, Israel, and Italy for the gas pipeline to come to Europe. One positive, perhaps, is the Israeli agreement with Egypt to supply $15 billion worth of gas. These things do bind countries together, but I fear the tripwires, and we've already heard, over the demarcation of gas fields will be a danger point. So where else can we look? Well, I normally talk about the promise of new technologies. We need something which isn't so top-down, but can be bottom-up, and already the ability of the next generation, which I think is critical. I have to say, I think the dynamics we're in will get worse before they get better. What we should be doing, what Europe should be doing from the outside, is investing in the next generation who are involved in linking with each other across current borders in the kind of platform-based economic models. It's not going to be an answer to everything, but it's certainly a way of addressing one of the underlying factors across the whole region, which is youth unemployment, that actually anyone with a mobile phone, with a smartphone, with an understanding of how to connect, can set up. There's already a business called Tajama. Just very briefly, it's been set up. It's all women, and I have to say, investing in women, I would say that, is probably the best way forward. It's a woman who's Jordanian. She's set up in Dubai. Her back office is in Amman. She employs women all across the region. This could also be linked up with Israeli high-tech under the right circumstances to create employment for the next generation. There are other ways. Infrastructure can be built. Already infrastructure is moving ahead. The Chinese are investing heavily across the region, obviously in their own interest, because their main interest is extending their trade routes, as we know, with the Silk Road, the One Road, One Belt idea, which they're actually looking further afield than the Middle East. They're not necessarily going to be so dependent they are now on importing oil and gas from this region, but they are looking to invest into Africa. So I think another way of looking at this, I know I'm running out of time, is to look further afield than the Middle East itself. The more you hone in, I agree the small scale changes will make a difference, but at the moment they're making a negative difference. The small scale, irresponsible, I would say, self-interested maneuvering that we see going on is not going to solve Syria. I'm sorry. It's not going to see a good outcome for the Syrian people. What I think outsiders should be doing more is investing in the young of the region, wherever they are, where they have a good idea, connecting them, investing them, and doing at least some of it through economics.